I think it's probably a good point to start.
So good morning, everyone, or good evening, depending on where you are. And welcome to our fifth session, maybe, of the conference. And today we have the second part of the free fermions at finite temperature mini course. And it is given by Jérémy Boutier. The first one was given by Grégory Schur. And without further ado, Jérémy, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you for the invitation. It's a pleasure to be here virtually. And so today I'm going to give a second part of the course on non-interacting trapped fermions at finite temperature. And today I will consider things from a slightly different perspective. I'm going to consider a different model. So in the lecture by Grégory, we saw fermions in one dimension on the real line trapped in a potential with a continuous position. I'm going to consider now a discrete lattice 1D and with a linear potential. So it's a different model, but it's going to be, at least for the edge behavior, it's going to be in the same universality class. So just to give you, we'll try to do some pictures. So we have a lattice. The sides are indexed by integers. Actually, for technical reasons, it's better to work with half integers. So the sides are indexed by 1/2, 3/2, etc. It's better for symmetry reasons. I will represent, so there will be particles, fermionic particles living on the lattice. And so I will represent a site which is occupied by a black dot. And some sites will remain empty. And I will represent them with a white dot. And so you start to have fermions on this lattice, and there will be a linear potential. So in some sense, there will be a force pushing to the fermions to the left. So if you just put on this model a single fermion, it's going to, by the effect of the force, it's going to be pushed to -infinity, and it will disappear. So the way to balance this linear potential is to have from the beginning to compensate it with the Fermi reduction, and to consider already an infinite number of fermions. So you have infinitely many fermions, and what happens is that eventually on the left, there will be every site will be occupied, etc. So all sites occupied eventually on the left. And if you add an extra fermion, then it cannot enter into this region because it's already occupied, and then it will stay close to the origin. On the other hand, it's very improbable that you have a fermion on the right because it would cost a lot of energy. So eventually, all sites will be empty. And in the middle, there will be some sort of fluctuating region where it's a region of interest. Is the region where sites can be occupied or not. There is some randomness going on. So why is this model well, okay, interesting and relevant? So maybe let's say a word of motivation. So it's already okay. First, but I won't talk about that today. It's actually just a Schur measure in disguise. And so it has interest for algebraic point of view. It's a nice model with lots of peculiar properties. There is also a connection with XX speed chain. We'll talk about that. And then also, I recently discovered by a colleague of mine that it's actually very similar model, essentially the same model, are considered in electronic quantum optics. And so for this, you can see papers by Pascal De Giovanni and his collaborators. I won't give lots of reference in this lecture, but we can. I could give them, for instance, tomorrow at the discussion, the discussion session. And about the universality class. So it's so why could I argue that this model is in the same universality class, at least for the edge, as the one we saw yesterday? So yesterday we were well, not yesterday, on Tuesday. We were considering fermions in a potential, which could be harmonic or non-harmonic, and then eventually the potential was going to be filled by fermions. So there would be a large number of fermions in this. They would extend into a macroscopic region, but then we were interested in the edge behavior. That is, we were looking at this region. And then, so we have a very large number, a large n of fermions, and we saw that there would be fluctuations of the order at the edge of n to the 1/3. And so these fluctuations are small with respect to the typical size extension of a potential. And so in this regime, it's fair to approximate the potential by its tangent, so by a linear potential. So that's why this model is of a linear potential is relevant. And okay, so something, although it's really a model with here in our model we have a number of fermions which is infinite from the beginning. That is from the beginning in this model we already take the large n limit from the beginning. So n is not really the parameter we are going to use we were going to have another parameter which will play the role of n and which we will send to infinity to get a continuum limit. Let me say a word about, yes, a bit more about the universality. What we are going to see in this model is that, so if we, in this limit, this continuum limit, the fermion density, so here it was a discrete model, but we take a continuum limit, which maybe I will explain a bit later. And in this limit, so you'll see that, okay, the density of fermions, which would be the one-point function, then because of the discreteness of the model, it will saturate to 1. You cannot put more than one fermion at a side, so the density of fermions will, the maximal density will be 1. And this will be attained on the left. On the right, it will, on the contrary, be equal to 0. And then in between, there will be a limit shape curve, which actually has been computed exactly, and which will have this slope. And what is most interesting for the edge behavior is that it's going to be, it's not the, so it's the analog of a Wigner semicircle, but it's not the same thing. It's a different curve. But the universal feature which is common is the vanishing of this density at the, for instance, at the right edge, that is the position of the rightmost fermion. It vanishes as the square root of the position, and this is why it's the same as for Wigner. For the Wigner semicircle, and that's why you expect a universality. So okay, let me do a bit of on a qualitative and to put things on the same footing as the one we saw before. So I will do. It's not going to be. So let's do heuristics and consider with the same point of view as we had in Gregory's lecture. Consider we can describe the model I want with a one particle Hamiltonian. So imagine we describe it with there would be a single fermion. So as I said, there would be an issue to describe. There is an issue to describe things with one particle Hamiltonian. Is that a single fermion would be attracted to the left? But still, let's see what's going on. So now we describe the system by a wave function, which is which now it's just indexed by it's a sequence of complex numbers indexed by the sides of the lattice, and the Hamiltonian acting on a wave function. So there would be two terms. There would be the linear potential term. We can scale the units to this represents the n is just the linear potential. And then there is a hopping term. And here I have some parameter, x. And so it's, and the hopping term is this one. So if you didn't have this linear potential, you would just recognize the tight binding Hamiltonian for fermions on the line. And now we superimpose it with a linear potential. So okay, this Hamiltonian is a bit tricky to study because it is not bounded below. That is on the left for n-2 infinity, the potential is tending to minus infinity. But still, okay, if we don't care much about what we are doing, there is still a nice, we can still find the eigenvectors. And the eigenvectors turn out to be just the Bessel functions. Given by Bessel functions. So J is the Bessel function of the first kind, I believe. And the reason why these are indeed the eigenvectors is I think you can find this on, I found this at least on Wikipedia, is that the Bessel function, it is known that they satisfy a simple recurrence relation, which is JA minus n minus 1 of 2x is equal to n over x, JN of 2x. Okay. So you see that the dependency of n is in the index of the Bessel function. And so the recurrence relation, if you take this and you plug it into the Hamiltonian, you will see that phi n p is eigenvector. It's a simple exercise with eigenvalue p. Okay. But here p, for different reasons that I don't enter into details, the index is restricted to integer, and so p can be an arbitrary half integer, because n was half an integer, but you want the global index to be an integer. And so, if you, for instance, if you would like to construct the ground state of your Hamiltonian, the many-body state with lowest energy, what you would like to do is to fill all state with a negative energy. But now, well, okay, you're a bit, so you could do it and try to define a Slater determinant to have a many-body wave function. But for this, I would have to have infinitely many wave function. That is, I would like to construct a state with phi minus 1/2, phi minus 3/2, etc. I would have infinitely many things, and so it's a bit troublesome to define a wave function for infinitely many particles. So, okay, so that's why I won't keep with this point of view, even though it gives some intuition. And I will work instead with a description using Fock space. And so the idea of Fock space is, okay, we have a many-body system, and so what we were doing before is to have one Hilbert space for every number of particles. That is, you would have, we described by one wave function a single particle, and then we would have another Hilbert space for two particles, and etc. But then, okay, and then you will take a big Fock space will be a big Hilbert space that encompasses all of them. So it would be a sum of all. So at a formal level, you could write this as being the sum of. Okay. You could write it as the direct sum of states with n particles. And since we are working with fermions, Fn would be essentially an exterior product of one body. But I won't enter much into these formalities here. So I will just present some sort of effective construction of this Fock space, which is more combinatorial. So let's just work with view Fock space as a vector space, and I will start by defining a basis of this state. And the basis of this state of this space is just, well, the states we saw before. So so these particle configurations, again with particles on the left, holes on the right, and maybe some disorder in the middle. So they are sometimes called the Maya diagrams. A way to view them is to encode the position of the particles, the position where you have particles by a set S. So it's a subset S of half integers. And not every subset forms an admissible Maya diagram. You have to have some condition. That is exactly the condition I said before. On the right, every site has to be empty, so it means that S admits the maximum. It has the rightmost element. And the complement of S, that is the set of holes, that would be Z prime minus set minus S, admits on the overhead minimum. Yes, and so you have a countable, by the way, you have a countable number of sets. And in particular, so the letter I will use for these sets will be S, and from this you associate a basis element, a vector, which I will denote with a ket, Dirac notation. So that will be a vector, and this will be a vector in my Fock space F. And all these, when you take all vectors corresponding to subsets to Maya diagrams, they form a basis of Maya. And in particular, I have what we could call either the vacuum, or maybe it's better the domain wall state, which I will denote by okay, it's a bit improper to it's not really the empty set, but it's just fill every site with negative energy and leave empty every. So it's really, in fact, it could correspond to S being the set of negative half integers. So okay, so this is the basis of my state, and then from this I will construct some operators acting on this state. And we are going to play with them, do sort of quantum mechanics. So the first things I will introduce are the annihilation and creation operators. So these are really operators which are really at the core of the formalism of Fock space or second quantization, because they change the number of particles. So they map a space with a given number of particles to another space, to a space with more or less particles. And so let me give them a definition. So I will denote them by CK for the annihilation operator and CK dagger for the creation operator. And here K will be still a half integer, that will be a position. And a good way to view them, for instance, CK, is to say, okay, I have a state. I start with a certain state S. So there will be particles and holes, etc. And then at position K, we attempt to add a particle. And then two situations can arise at this stage. Either there is already a particle, in which case it's not possible to put two particles on the same site, and then you get 0. Otherwise, if the site is empty, you can add a particle and there is no problem. You will do it. So I can define ck by its action on my basis. And I'm just saying that it's going to be 0 if, sorry, okay, I'm a bit, I try to inverted things. So let's, actually this is the creation operator, so C dagger K. So it's going to create a put of 0 if K was already in the set S. That is, you attempt to add a particle where there was already one. And if not, then it's fine. You just make it. So it means that I get the state S, and I'm adding a particle at position K. And I will do so with a plus or minus sign. And this sign is crucial. This sign, okay, I can. This sign is just it's -1 to the number of particles on the right of K. So this number is always finite because S was a Maillet diagram. So there is when you attempt to insert a particle, there could be, for instance, if I had two particles there in S, then I would get -1 to the 2 equal 1. So I want to put aside. And then so this was for the creation operator. The annihilation operator works the same, except you just reverse the role of particles and holes. And so it will, if you attempt to remove a particle when there is no particle, it's forbidden. So you get 0 if there was no K, and then otherwise it's fine, you can remove a particle. And you do it so with the same sign as before. Okay. And so, okay, this sounds like this is like a definition, but the key property of these operators is that they satisfy the canonical anti-commutation relations. So by the way, these are really closely related. So essentially, you can view that CK and CK dagger are obtained by Jordan-Wigner transform. If you think about the language of spin chains, they are really Jordan-Wigner transforms of the spin operator. So Jordan-Wigner. Okay, this is just a remark for people who are familiar with this topic. And so what are the canonical anti-commutation? They are really algebraic relation between satisfied by this operator. And the most interesting one, okay, there are trivial ones to say that two creation operators anti-commute for all ij or ik. And the reason why they anti-commute is really due to the sign. So you can check this relation just by from the definition I gave you. It's an exercise. You can check that. If you can check, basically you check this relation on every state. You check that it's the same to if you add first a particle at position K and another one at, you remove a particle at position K and another one at position A. It's the same if I do it in the order, except for the sign, which will be changed between the two cases. Right, so there is of course the same relation when I take the daggers, the adjoints, and then the non-trivial one is this one, and it's going to be delta ik. That is, it's going to be 0 if I is different by than k, but it's going to be 1, the identity operator, if I is equal to k. And the reason, okay, this is you can check it. And an important remark is that, in particular, in this case, when I equal k, I can define what I could call the fermion number operator, ck dagger ck is measures whether there is a particle at k. So what do I mean by that? It's really an operator which is diagonal in my basis. If I act from the above definition, I am attempting to look whether there is a particle at side k. I remove it, and then I recreate it immediately and with the same sign. So I'm back with my initial state if k is in S, and otherwise I get 0. So I get S if k is in S and 0 otherwise. Okay. And then one by the anti-commutation relation, the operator which measures whether there is a hole at side k is just ck dagger. And these are important because this is what we are going to use to make measurements. Okay. So now I have constructed my creation and integration operators. I will construct everything in terms of them. And there is a very important class of operators, which are the quadratic operators. So we are going basically to consider operators of the form Ci dagger Cj with coefficients Ij. And a remark is that this kind of quadratic operators, they form a Lie algebra. So this is an important algebraic property. You consider their commutators. Using the anti-commutation relation, you can work out the commutation relation. And so I'm not going to discuss everything in generality, but I'm going just to give examples which are relevant to my thing. So the first thing is the total number of fermions, fermion number operator. So basically, you want to measure the total number of fermions. So a possible definition, which would be naive, is to say, okay, I just want to sum over all sites whether there is a position. And you see that it's indeed nk is indeed quadratic. It's my fermion number operator is indeed quadratic. It's I can replace it by this definition, ck dagger ck. But this operator is not really well defined because it's going to be the number of fermions is infinite. But there is a way to regularize it. Is to say I'm going to instead of writing this, I'm just going to take the sum over k positive. And here I have a finite number of fermions always on the right. And then I am going to add so the same thing, but I will regularize it with the -1. So if I want, I can replace this from sorry. By the definition, I can just replace this by exchanging using the anti-commutation relation. This is my this is the Fermion number of factors. So in particular, for instance, on the domain wall state, it's 0 by definition. So this is the first operator. And then another one, which is the linear potential operator, essentially, which I will denote by H0. Well, it's exactly the same. I will let me first write the ill-defined definition. I would say it's a bit. I'm going to measure whether there is a fermion at position k and multiply by k. So this would be the total energy, if you want, for in total potential energy in the linear potential. But again, this operator is not well defined because this sum is infinite. So to regularize this, I'm going to again to split the sum in two. And only take the positive part where the sum will be always finite, minus so sorry, the one with it's written in the other way. And so this would be my potential energy. And a remark is that this operator is positive. For instance, its ground state is the vacuum state, and every other state has it's a simple exercise to compute, for instance, for any state. Well, okay, it's apparent from the definition. It's going to be the sum. It's going to be the sum over k for k positive in S, minus the sum over k for k negative in S, and so by definition, this is always positive. So by the way, do not hesitate to interrupt if there are any questions. Okay. Then I'm going to, so these two operators are actually diagonal in my basis. I mean, they don't, if I act on a basis state, I get, sorry. Here is of course, it's the eigenvalue times S. Next, I'm going to consider some the analogs of my Hoping terms. The representation of my Hoping terms in second quantization. So it's going to be, the first one will be A will be the sum of Ck minus 1 Ck. There is so there is not really a problem of definition. I can take really a sum of all k. And so let's think about what this operator is doing. You are attempting to remove a particle at position k, and you will immediately recreate it at position k minus 1. So really what this operator is doing, yes, it will make the fermions jump to the left. The particles jump to the left. And this sum is always well defined on any state, because if you go for k very large, you won't see any particles to move, and on the contrary, if you go to the left, it's not going to be possible to create a fermion at position k minus 1. So that's why in practice, when you evaluate A on a basis state, the sum is always finite, so there is no problem of definition. And the adjoint operator, which will be symmetric one, you are just having, so A is attempting to move a particle to the left, and A dagger is moving it to the right. And so I'm going just to play with these four operators, N, H naught, A, and A dagger. They will be, I will construct my Hamiltonian using them. And so let me write what's going to be the Hamiltonian I'm going to use. And this is really this will be the correct representation of the previous Hamiltonian. I'm going to define my Hamiltonian H depending on the parameter X. Just yeah. So this is going to be the representation of Fock space on this of this Hamiltonian. So first H0 will be the linear potential, and there will be the Hoping terms here. So H naught minus X A plus A dagger, so that it's self-adjoint. Plus, okay, and I put a normalization X square for some reasons, so it's a scalar. Or I assume, for instance, that X is positive. I'm going to consider this sort of Hamiltonian. So in order to study this Hamiltonian, it's useful first to, okay, let me, so I will consider a density operator associated with this Hamiltonian. So this will be basically the weight I will put on the configuration, and will be basic one will be rho e to the minus beta hx. And beta is the temperature, inverse temperature. Okay, I didn't discuss the role of, actually you can define two different, so this is one of them, but I have not specified what is the number of particles. So actually you can define two different operators. There would be the ground canonical, the canonical ensemble. And then so the canonical rho is the same as to the minus beta h, but then I insist that I have the total number of particles in this fermion numerator. I'm in the sector of zero fermions. On the other hand, I can. It's going to be useful to consider also the. So maybe I have to switch page. The grand canonical one. Density operator. Is going to be as before to the minus beta hx. And now I have a chemical potential mu n. Mu the chemical potential. And so, okay, and now what is going to be the game? For instance, I will consider in my ensemble, in my model, I will consider the correlation functions. So what is their definition? So okay, I forgot something, which is you have to normalize every operator by a partition function in such a way that the trace has to. So that the partition function is chosen so that the trace is equal to 1. Okay, and now I'm going to consider, for instance, the correlation function of the particles, and I view this as a random ensemble of particles. So I fix position k1 up to kn in my lattice, and I'm going to consider the probability that these. Sorry, I should not. Little n, that these positions are jointly occupied. And what is the expression of this? Well, it's going to be the trace of the fermion number operators at position n1, k1 up to kn, times the density matrix, whichever one you have chosen. This is the definition of my correlation functions. So, okay, at this stage, maybe I can do some remarks. So, so what is this model about, and how does it recover previously known models? So, in particular, so I'm interested. So let me consider, for instance, the canonical model, canonical ensemble, and consider the zero temperature limit, so that is beta tends to infinity. So I want to study, okay, so we can ignore the charge for now, but I want to see what is the limit of beta as beta to infinity of e to the minus beta hx. What is the question? And this, there is a way to study this. And now, let me, the recipe is that this operator, you can rearrange it. So let me recall the definition of Hx. So Hx is a linear combination of H0, which is the linear potential, and this tie-binding Hamiltonian, or the Hamiltonian of the XH chain, if you want. Essentially, it contains open terms plus normalization. And so these different operators, they don't quite commute. H0 does not commute with A and A dagger. But they still satisfy some simple commutation relations. Let me write them down. And this is again a consequence of the canonical anti-commutation relation. So I can leave them as an exercise. So what are the different commutation relations between my operators N, H, A, and A dagger? So the first one, which is most important, is A and A dagger are really like the operators of annihilation and creator of harmonic oscillator. So they commute, their commutator is equal to the identity. So it's, you can really interpret them as bosonic annihilation and creation operators. These operators also, by definition, they conserve the charge. Because these linear opening terms, when you add a particle, they move particles, but they don't change the total number of particles. And then, what is their relation with the energy? Well, the operator A is moving a particle to the left. So it's basically reducing the linear potential energy by -1. So this translates into this commutation relation. On the contrary, A dagger is raising the energy. And so, out of this relation, out of this commutation relation, I can, for instance, re-express to the minus beta Hx, so which I can rewrite as H0 minus XA plus A dagger. I can try to write it in normal order. That is, I would like to put the creation operators on the left, the annihilation operator on the right, and H0 will remain in the middle. And this is a more complicated exercise, but you can do it using Baker-Kambers-Dorf formula. Let me write you the solution. So, first there is a normalization factor. Then I will have an exponential of the creation A operator. Right, this is this. Then I will have H0 in the middle. And then the same operator, but with the same function, but for annihilation operator. And what you see from this is that now from this expression, it's easy to take the limit as beta tends to infinity. And in particular, H0 is the linear potential. So when beta tends to infinity, we saw, I think I already write it, that H0, its ground state is the domain wall boundary state of the vacuum, if you want. So this, as beta tends to infinity, tends to the projector on the vacuum state. And now beta tends to infinity, so you see that this factor tends to 0, so I get e to the minus x A dagger. Sorry, no, there is no minus. And e to the xa. And now this factor tends to e to the x. And so what do you recognize here? You recognize the projector on a state which I could denote by x. I recognize this, so the limit, essentially, this is the limit of e to the minus h beta x as beta tend to infinity, is a projector on this state x, which is, okay, you can view it as being a coherent state. In the language of quantum mechanics, I'm acting on a vacuum with exponential of a creation operator. I also leave it as, for the people who know about random partition, that this is actually the Poissonized Planchard measure.
Jeremy, there is a question. The question is, shouldn't it be exponential of negative x squared in the...
Yes, you're perfectly right. Yes, because here, yes, exactly. Yes. And that's why here, I think the normalization is correct. Yes. Thank you. Right. So, so we see that in the zero temperature limit, this model is has the ground state of this Hamiltonian is the coherent state. Okay. So let me. So now I'm going to consider more generally the finite temperature version. And I'm going to, well, okay, there is an important thing like this, which is again, so let's go back to the correlation functions. So I want to evaluate these correlation functions. So, okay, you can use algebra and evaluate them for both the canonical and grand-canonical ensemble. But for the canonical ensemble, okay, you can find a formula, but it's not going to be very illuminating. But there is, for the grand canonical ensemble, you will find a determinantal formula. It's a determinantal point process. So this has already been mentioned by Gregory, that in the grand canonical ensemble, the fermions are we obtain a determinantal point process. And here the algebraic reason for this is Wick's theorem or Wick's lemma. In literature it's called Wick's lemma because and so what is Wick's lemma? It says okay, that when the density operator is exponential of a quadratic operator. So quadratic operator as I introduced before. So quadratic in the fermionic equation and annihilation operator. So all these operators which I have introduced are indeed quadratic in the fermions. Then you can the correlation function, as I defined it, can be written in the form of a determinant. So there will be a correlation kernel, Ki, Kj, where this correlation kernel is basically the propagator of two-point correlation function, C dagger, Ck. And so this lemma holds really only when you have a quadratic operator. So in particular, well, okay, it's not quite. It also holds in the limit beta tends to infinity. So that's why when you take the zero temperature limit, you still have it's a limit of for exponential of a quadratic operator. So that's why in the zero temperature limit, we can also have a determinantal structure, and zero temperature, we don't really care about the fact we are canonical or not. Okay, canonical or canonical ensemble. So okay, I'm not going to give a proof of this lemma, but there is a proof which I think was originally due to Gaudin, which is basically a proof by induction on n. So of course it's true by definition for n equal 1, and then when n is positive, the idea of a proof. Well, okay, let's go back to the definition. So you have this correlation function, which you can write in this way. And here I have each of these operators is a product of annihilation and creation operators, and then you are going to want to evaluate this. And the idea is going to use the canonical anti-commutation relation. And for instance, you take the leftmost creation operator and move it to the right using anti-commutation. And so you can see what's going on when you move it to the right using anti-commutation until you hit the density operator. And at this stage, you can also commute it with the density operator using the fact that the density operator is exponential of a quadratic. And so you are using some algebraic properties there. So you can evaluate exactly what the commutation takes place, and then you put it back using cyclicity of a trace at the beginning. So and what you realize is that doing this operation, basically it's your induction. That is sometimes there will be a pairing. That is you will use a non-trivial anti-commutation with 1 over ck, and that will give you a term of this form. Otherwise, it's back to its initial position, and then you use it as it's really a term of the same form as the original one. And from this, you can write an induction formula for Rn, and you have an induction formula, and you compare it with just the expansion of the determinant with respect to the first column, and they satisfy the same induction, and the initial term for n equal 1 is the same, so this is true for n. So basically, this is the idea of proof by induction. So let me know. So yeah, 2 minutes left. So okay, this is the outcome of this story, and now. When you are there, you also want to evaluate explicitly this especially for the grand canonical ensemble, you want to evaluate this correlation function. So again, this can be done exactly using the algebra properties, and I'm going to give you the result. So for the grand canonical ensemble. So recall that in this density operator, in this case, will be the partition function is beta mu, and e to the minus b hx minus b. So there is an explicit form for the correlation kernel. K is the finite temperature discrete Bessel kernel. And so it has an explicit expression, which is using index AB, going to be a sum over all half integer L. and it's going to have this expression in terms of the Bessel function. And there will be, again, a Fermi factor. So here we recognize the Fermi factor. Okay. So, okay, here, this is the end result. But in some sense, we could have already intuitively obtained this result from the heuristics at the beginning of the course, because we saw at in this heuristic description that we had the eigenvectors of this of the one-body Hamiltonian are the Bessel function, really this Bessel function. And we said, okay, for zero temperature, we would have to fill every state with negative energy and leave the others empty. And for finite temperature, you would just fill them with probability given by the Fermi factor. And this is exactly the formula you see here. We could have this intuition from the beginning. But this is the propagator, which of the kernel, which corresponds exactly to the situation where I have the state with energy L, and I include it with the probability given by the Fermi factor. So now, so this is the result, and now what I want to discuss during the last minutes are the asymptotics. So asymptotics here, the parameter I have is going to be x tend to infinity. So let's first consider the case of zero temperature. So we can analyze. This is a problem that is well studied. The asymptotics of the Bessel kernel. It was done in the two simultaneous papers of Borodin, Kunkov, Olshansky, and Johansson around 2000. And so you can really study the asymptotics of this process. And here is the qualitative result. Is that you find this? So first regime, you will study the limit shape regime. So you take x to infinity, and then you take the position. So suppose I have my the position at which I observe. So for instance, I can consider the one-point function, R1 of k, which be k of okay. And I will consider it in the regime where k is linear in x. So k over x has a limit. So I can write it as k of order x. And so you see that in this limit, this tends to a continuous function, scaling function if you want. I could, well, I cannot really call it rho, but a certain function of k over x. So this is the density, which I plotted at the beginning. So it's a density that is between 0 and 1, in which has this form. So this is the Logan shape. So it was already obtained by other methods by Logan shape, Mershik and Karov. And basically the density, so here it's equal to 1, here it's equal to 0, and in between it's equal to the arc cosine function. It's really explicit. And here the position of the right edge is 2x, and the left edge is minus 2x. So this is the limit shape result. And then we can look at fluctuations. fluctuation of the position of the rightmost particle. So you know that the rightmost particle is going to be close to x, but then you can ask what are these what are the fluctuations. And well, okay, this is if you are at 0 temperature, fluctuation of the rightmost particle, and this is because the density is vanishing with square root, the fluctuation of the rightmost particle are of order x to the 1/3. Okay, so this is would be for 0 temperature. And this you can view them as being quantum fluctuations. On the other hand, what happens when you start to add temperature? So now when beta is finite, and now beta is finite, it's another source of fluctuation because you have a linear potential. So it is I have chosen it to be unitless, so it has no units. And so what it means is that there will be thermal fluctuations. So basically you have a particle which is the linear potential, and it costs 1 unit energy to move to the right and gives one energy unit to the left. And so the thermal fluctuation, the position of the particle, should be of order beta minus 1. And so when you compare this thing, you see that you have an interesting crossover edging at the edge when these two quantities are of the same order of magnitude. And so this is completely analogous to what Gregory has discussed. And the crossover regime for the edge will be when beta equal 1 is equal to x to the 1/3 divided by, so I'm using the same notation as Gregory, you fix a number be positive. Right. Yes. So, okay. So this is really the regime. Of course, this does not affect this. This will not affect the bulk. This when you have temperature of order x to the 1/3, you will see the effects of temperature only at the edge, but the temperature is not enough to affect the limit shape. So you will keep the same limit shape as for 0 temperature in this regime. So you can put it close. And what is the result? What is the formula? So I'm going to consider my discrete finite temperature Bessel kernel. And to study this regime, I want to consider the case where I'm looking at close to the edge, plus fluctuations of order x to the 1/3. And, with a certain factor s, real number s. Let's consider the correlation with what happens at position given by x prime in a normalized image. So I need to add factor x to the, because it's this will be essentially a density. So I'm considering really the limit x tend to infinity, and where I keep b equal beta x to the 1/3 fixed. And the result is the same finite temperature Airy kernel that Gregory has written in this lecture, which is this. So we obtain the finite temperature Airy kernel. So this is the convergence of the kernel itself. It implies by some arguments and some extra arguments you need to add, but tail bounds, that it implies the convergence of the rightmost particle. means that the rightmost particle will be given by the Fredholm determinant of 1 minus kb. So during the remaining minutes, I will just sketch the proof of this result. It's okay. It's an analytic exercise because an exercise of analysis because we have an explicit expression for this Bessel kernel. And for this, maybe the easiest way is not to use completely this formula, but to use an equivalent formula of by contour integral. So let me write another representation. So this is the proof I do. So K of AB, the finite temperature discrete Bessel kernel, I can represent it in another way as a double contour integral. So first, I have a contour integral where over Z, where Z has modulus just a bit above 1, and another integral over another variable W, where W has modulus just below 1, and you have this expression. You have the same expression for W. And you have a certain quantity kappa ZW, where the definition of kappa is fermionic propagator in the ground mechanical ensemble. It has this expression. So by the way, this kappa was already appeared in a paper by Borodin on the periodic Shor process. So you have a sum representation for this kappa. Kappa of ZW. You see that it's just a function of Z over W, and if you look at this integral representation, you see this sum is convergent when it is a well-defined sum when Z over W is larger than 1, because to have convergence at minus infinity, and but smaller than e to the beta, to have convergence at plus infinity. But in fact, this function is essentially an elliptic function. Theta is related to theta functions. It can be extended to a meromorphic function in the plane, and this function will have poles at every power of e to the beta. So when Z over W, it has poles at when e to the beta n for an integer. But here we have its Laurent series expansion inside a certain. It is a bit nasty function, but it's. And now you want to do to analyze this the asymptotics of this quantity. And okay, if we forget about the fact that we are at finite temperature, we are in a well-known case, which has been our lecture notes by Runkov, which explains the general method. The idea is to use saddle point approximation. So you see, okay, you can rewrite the integral in a saddle point form. So here I'm really taking A to be of the form 2x plus A prime and B, so close to the edge, plus B prime. And so this 2x, you see that it makes a term of order x, which goes with this x here. Okay, and I get something like e to the x s of z minus sw dw z to the a prime plus 1 w to the minus b prime plus 1. And I have still this kappa z cw, which I have not defined yet. And what you can see is that for different reasons, so okay, by the way, I didn't say that the fact that I'm using z of modulus just a bit above 1 and w just a bit below 1, just give the only role of this is to give a prescription on the way you encircle the pole of kappa at z equal to w. And so what is S of z from this definition? So it incorporates z minus 1 and the contribution proportional to x in this. So S of z is equal to z minus 1 minus 2 log z. And the property of this action, which is particular, is that it has a double critical point. At z equal 1. That is s prime of 1. Yes, second derivative is 0, but s first is 0. And if you, well, okay, you have to convince, do this, if you really want, you have to justify a few things, but I will not enter into details here, is that this integral will be dominated by the vicinity of the double critical point. So that is when z is close to 1 and w is close to 1. And this suggests to do a change of variable. Z e to the new variable zeta times e x to the minus 1/3, and w for the same e to the omega x to the minus 1/3. And where, okay, so here zeta and omega are complex numbers, so they should be chosen in such a way that z has a modulus slightly above 1 and w has a modulus slightly above 2. And a good way to do that is just to take, for instance, the real part of zeta to be 1/4 and real part of omega. So it means that I will integrate them over lines parallel to the imaginary axis. So see here the 1/4 is a bit conventional. It can be so it should not be too large, so that you don't hit the pole at the next pole at z over w equal e to the beta, but for this regime it's fine. So z is integrated over this contour. Sorry, zeta is integrated over this contour, and omega is integrated over this contour. So I'm at the end of the time, but I should be done in 2 or 3 minutes, I think.
You'll have 2 or 3 minutes. And I have a small remark. Shouldn't there be a beta, sorry, a b in the change of variables somewhere?
No, actually I've absorbed it. Look, I wrote it here with x, but of course you can put the v back using the relation that e to the minus equal beta, equal beta over b. So you can, if you prefer, you can write it with beta over b. That's the same.
Yes.
And okay, and then when you do this thing, you will be able, okay, you will be dominated by the region where zeta and omega are finite, and you will use a Taylor expansion of z around this of s, sorry, around this point, and you see that L to the 1/3 k of AB is approximated by 2i pi square. So the double contour integral, but on these contours of, and then, okay, here, when I do the Taylor expansion, all I have to keep is the first non-zero part, and it will be of the order zeta 3, because I have a double critical point, so I have just the third derivative to keep. Zeta 3 over 3. And then, okay, and then now let me take the correction, the A prime, to be S to the X 1/3, and the prime to be S prime X to the 1/3. So you see that this E to the, when you do this Z to the A prime, will tend to finite limit, because this is this, and you take its power Z to the A, you will kill the X. It will give you something like this, S to the zeta, right, minus zeta d omega. Here you recognize something which is quite close if you know the contour integral representation of the Airy function. Airy of u, Airy of s is just would be just, for instance, a single integral e to the zeta 3 over 3 minus s zeta d zeta over this contour. And the other one, just by reflection, would be the same integral. But we are not quite there yet, because we have this factor to deal with. And we need to estimate this. So this one is, okay, it's not, you can do it in different ways, but a good way to estimate it. So look, you must estimate this thing when beta goes to 0. And so to estimate this thing, well, okay, there is a trick, which is to use the Poisson summation formula. It is okay, I won't have time to explain, but just by the Poisson summation formula, you can find the dominant contribution from this, and it turns out to be a sine, this expression. And now it involves B, as you mentioned, Dan, because I have beta, which conspire with X. So B is the dependence on B is appearing in this factor. So we can make a bit of space. So it's essentially pi divided by B sine of pi zeta minus omega divided by B. So it has poles at every, when zeta minus omega divided by B is an integer, but by the choice of contours you have, you never hit into these poles. So this is the expression we have. And so we are not quite there yet, but almost, because I can use this pi over sine. I can use an integral representation for it. And I can, it's just a simple integral representation, du e to the omega minus zeta u divided by 1 plus e to the minus bu. This is a simple exercise in complex analysis to check that this is indeed equal. And I plug this integral representation into this thing. And you see that now it will just amount. So I have my limit.
Jeremy,
will be not given by a triple. Sorry?
The big L
should be an X.
Yeah. Also above.
Yeah, you're right, yes.
And there's the slightly bigger issue that you're using B for two different things.
Oh, yes. Yeah, so let me put it. Okay. Let's forget. Okay. And now you have an integral over u. And if you rearrange all factors using this representation, you get Airy function of s plus u, Airy function of s prime plus u, where you use this integral representation here, divided by e2. And this is indeed the finite temperature kernel. And this is the end of the computation. So thank you for your attention.
right, thank you, Jeremy. Let us